Most people have never been inside a data center. They picture a room full of computers, blinking lights, maybe some cables. What they don't picture is the sound, a constant machine-generated hum that never stops. Not for maintenance, not for holidays. Not at 3 a.m. when you are the only human being in a building the size of a warehouse, surrounded by rows of server racks that stretch into the darkness like the stacks of a library built for something that isn't human. These facilities keep the internet running. They store every photograph, every message, every piece of data you've ever created. And someone has to be there, alone at night, to make sure the machines keep breathing. These are 3 true stories from people who work the night shift in data centers. The machines were never the problem. I took a job at a co-location facility outside of Austin in 2023. Third shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay was decent for what amounted to walking the floor every 90 minutes, checking temperature readings, and making sure nothing caught fire. The facility was massive. 4 data halls, each one roughly the size of a football field, filled floor to ceiling with server racks. Between the racks were corridors called hot aisles and cold aisles. The hot aisles carried the exhaust heat from the servers, and the cold aisles delivered chilled air. The temperature differential between a hot aisle and a cold aisle could be 20 degrees or more. My job was simple. Walk each hall, check the environmental monitoring stations, log any alerts, and escalate anything above threshold. For the first 2 months, nothing happened. The facility ran like clockwork. The only sounds were the HVAC units and the occasional click of a hard drive failing, which happened often enough that you stopped noticing. Then, in my 3rd month, I started getting temperature anomalies in Hall C, specifically in one cold aisle, row 47. The monitoring station would flag a temperature spike, usually 3 to 4 degrees above baseline, at roughly the same time each night, between 2 and 3 a.m. I'd walk down there, check the sensors, check the airflow, check the floor tiles for blockages. Everything looked normal. The temperature would have already corrected by the time I arrived. I'd logged it as a transient spike and move on. This happened 4 nights in a row. On the 5th night, I decided to stay in the aisle and wait for it. I bought a folding chair. I sat down at one end of row 47 with my laptop and my monitoring dashboard open. The cold aisle was narrow, about 4 feet wide, and stretched the full length of the hall. The server racks on either side rose 7 feet tall, their blue status LEDs blinking in the dark. At 2:14 a.m., the temperature reading on my dashboard ticked up. 1 degree, then 2. I looked down the aisle. Nothing had changed. The HVAC was running. The airflow felt normal. And then I felt it. Warmth. Not from the servers, from the aisle itself. As if something warm was moving through the cold air, moving toward me. I stood up. The warmth passed me, like someone walking by, close enough that I could feel the displacement of air against my arm. There was no one there. I was looking directly down a straight, well-lit corridor between 2 walls of machines. There was nowhere to hide, nothing to obstruct my view. The aisle was empty. The temperature reading dropped back to baseline. I requested a transfer to day shift the following week. My supervisor asked why. I told him the HVAC in Hall C was unreliable. It was easier than the truth. I was a security contractor for a data center in Northern Virginia. The facility was a Tier 4 site, the highest classification, which meant it had redundant everything. 2 of every power source, 2 of every cooling system, and cameras. Hundreds of cameras. Every corridor, every entrance, every data hall, every mechanical room. And my job was overnight monitoring. Sit in the Security Operations Center, watch the camera feeds, respond to alerts, and log any access attempts after hours. The facility was supposed to be empty between midnight and 6 a.m. Authorized access required biometric scans, badge taps, and a logged entry in the access control system. If someone was in the building after midnight, I would know, because the system would tell me. One night in February, I was cycling through camera feeds, something I did every 20 minutes out of sheer boredom, when I noticed something on camera 72. Camera 72 covered a corridor in the mechanical section. The area housed HVAC compressors, electrical switchgear, backup generators. No servers. No reason for anyone to be there at night. On the feed, I could see the door at the far end of the corridor. It was open. I checked the access log. No entry had been recorded for that door in over 12 hours. I rewound the footage. At 1:47 a.m., the door opened. No one approached it from the corridor side. It simply opened from the inside. I watched for 90 seconds. Nothing came through the door. It just stayed open. And then, at 1:49, the door closed. Slowly, as if someone was pulling it shut from the other side. I called the facility manager. He checked the access logs remotely and confirmed what I was seeing. No badge tap, no biometric scan, no authorization. He told me to investigate. I did not want to investigate. But I went. I took my flashlight and my radio and I walked to the mechanical section. The corridor was lit by emergency lighting. Dim, orange, industrial. I could hear the compressors running behind the walls. The air was warm. I reached the door from camera 72. It was closed and locked. I tapped my badge and the door opened. The room behind it was a mechanical space, compressors, pipes, electrical panels. I swept my flashlight across the room. Empty. No one. Nothing out of place. And then I looked up. There was a ceiling access panel directly above the door. It was displaced, shifted about 6 inches from its seated position, as if someone had pushed it open from below and climbed through. Above the ceiling panels was a maintenance crawl space that connected the mechanical rooms across the entire eastern wing of the facility. I backed out of the room. I closed the door. I returned to the Security Operations Center and called the facility manager again. He sent a maintenance team at 6 a.m. and they checked the crawl space. They found a sleeping bag, a bag of food, and a phone charger plugged into an unsecured outlet. Someone had been living in the crawl space of a Tier 4 federal data center. The access logs showed no record of how they got in or how long they'd been there. The facility went into full security lockdown. Every crawl space in the building was searched. The person was never found. I don't know if they left. I don't know if they were still in the building while we searched. I don't know who they are or what they wanted. I know they were close enough to open a door in the middle of the night while I watched on camera. And I know the building's security system. The system I was supposed to trust had no record of them ever existing. I need to preface this by saying I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm an electrical engineer. I work with systems that behave according to physical laws. Everything has an explanation, even if I don't have it yet. I'm telling you this because what I experienced doesn't fit any explanation I've been able to construct. I was doing overnight maintenance on a decommissioned data center in Maryland. The facility was being dismantled, servers removed, racks stripped, power systems disconnected. My company had been contracted to handle the electrical decommissioning, verify that circuits were dead, remove panel boards, certify the space for the demolition crew. The building still had power to the lighting and HVAC, enough to work safely, but the data halls themselves were empty. Miles of cable trays with nothing in them, bare concrete floors, rows and rows of empty rack positions, like a library with all the books removed. It's a particular kind of emptiness. Not the emptiness of an unbuilt space, the emptiness of a space that used to be full. You can feel the absence. I was working alone in Hall B. My colleague had gone to the truck to get equipment. The nearest occupied space was the loading dock, 3 hallways and 2 security doors away. I could not hear anything from the outside. I was tracing a conduit run along the ceiling when I heard it. A voice, clear, conversational volume coming from the next aisle over. It said, "Check row 12. I froze. Not because the words were frightening, because the voice was familiar. It sounded like a colleague I'd worked with years ago. A man named David, who had died in 2019. I know how that sounds. I know. I walked to the next aisle. Empty. Bare concrete, stripped racks, cable trays with nothing in them. No one was there. I stood in the silence and tried to rationalize it. Sound travels strangely in large reflective spaces. Decommissioned HVAC systems can produce frequencies that the human ear can interpret as speech. There are documented phenomena, infrasound, acoustic pareidolia. That explains why people hear voices in industrial environments. I know all of this. I'm an engineer. I walked to row 12 anyway. There was nothing unusual about row 12. Same empty racks, same bare floor, same stripped cable trays. Except for one thing. The conduit I'd been tracing on the ceiling, the one I'd been about to certify as dead, ran directly over row 12. And at the junction box above row 12, I could see scorch marks on the metal casing. I tested the circuit, and it was live. 240 volts, running through a conduit that had been tagged and certified as de-energized by the previous crew. If I had proceeded with my original work plan, cutting into that conduit run from the next aisle, the result would have been, at minimum, a severe electrical burn. At the voltages involved, it could have been fatal. I reported the live circuit. It was isolated and properly de-energized. The certifications from the previous crew were reviewed. An error was found in their documentation. The wrong conduit had been tagged. A routine error, a paperwork mistake. The kind of thing that kills electricians every year. I told my colleague what happened when he returned. He asked how I knew to check row 12. I told him I'd noticed the scorch marks during a visual inspection. I did not tell him about the voice. I have never told anyone about the voice, because I'm an engineer, and engineers don't hear the voices of dead colleagues in empty buildings directing them away from live electrical circuits. But I heard it, clear as I'm speaking to you now. Check row 12. I don't believe in the paranormal, but I don't work alone in decommissioned facilities anymore. If you work in any kind of facility alone at night, data center, warehouse, manufacturing plant, always tell someone where you are. Always carry a radio, and if something tells you to check a particular location, even if you can't explain why, check it. If you have a true story you'd like to share, the link is in the description. Subscribe if you're new. New stories every Tuesday and Friday.